Yahweh's pledge to the chosen people that their borders would extend from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the desert to the Euphrates River, and that he will grant peace in the land, and no one will make them afraid, remained unfulfilled despite their reverence. The Jews retained control over a small part of the Promised Land, subject to payment of tribute to their Persian overlords. When Alexander the Great defeated the Persians in the 4th century BC, they paid tribute to their Greek masters. It seemed the god they worshipped had no power to keep his promise to them.
Hebrews from the God of War.
When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, the Jews in Egypt and the Levant came under the control of the various Greek successor regimes. This included the Ptolemaic dynasty based in Alexandria, Egypt, and the Seleucid dynasty of Mesopotamia and Syria. Whether Ptolemaic or Seleucid, the Jews were now firmly within the Greek Hellenistic sphere of influence. In Alexandria and elsewhere, they followed Greek fashion in clothing and children's names. Houses of prayer imitated a Greek architectural style that was later reflected in synagogue design. Jewish merchants established commercial networks across the eastern Mediterranean, trading with the emerging Greek city-states. They observed the obligatory rituals after a fashion, rubbed shoulders with the Gentile unbelievers, intermarried with them, and they prospered. Things were not so good back in Palestine, where the Seleucids held sway, despite many Jews sharing the Hellenistic outlook of their overlords. An uneasy relationship existed between rulers and ruled, sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile. The Seleucids were impatient with the traditionalists and the singular exclusiveness of their worship, precluding Gentiles from entering the temple, for example. They would have preferred a more Hellenistic approach, where temples were open to all and the gods were not taken too seriously, except by the superstitious. Wisely, the Seleucids refrained from imposing their views, at least for a while. Any resentment felt by traditionalist Jews was kept beneath the surface for the most part. Yet they fumed as their Hellenist brethren supported the Seleucid reforms and repudiated the Holy Covenant. That all changed in the reign of Antiochus IV. It started with a bidding war between two ambitious rivals, Jason and Menelaus, for the position of high priest. The beneficiary of their largesse was the king. For a while, Jason had the upper hand. He sought to make Jerusalem a polis, essentially a Greek city where the inhabitants, or at least those with land and means, could call themselves citizens and have a say in the administration. Naturally, this was popular with those who had land and means. Menelaus was having none of this, and not for any religious or ideological motive. He was not opposed to the new policies. He just wanted power and was willing to pay a higher price than Jason to get it. The grateful king accepted the bribe. Jason was deposed and fled across the Jordan River for safety. Once in power, Menelaus proved a trifle heavy-handed. He set about building a citadel for the Seleucid troops, and, in the process, demolished some dwellings, not a popular move in a very crowded city. A riot ensued. Word of the unrest reached the ears of Jason, who made preparations and bided his time. Meanwhile, a rumor spread that Antiochus IV, who was engaged in a military campaign in Egypt, had suffered defeat and was dead. Seizing the moment, Jason crossed the Jordan River with a small force. Ever the opportunist, the one-time Hellenist now revealed himself as the champion of the Jewish faith and defender of the common people. His troops took the city and, with help from the mob, massacred the Greek garrison and any Jewish collaborators they found. It was a severe miscalculation. Though defeated in Egypt, Antiochus IV was very much alive and in a raging fury. He marched on the city and exacted brutal revenge on the inhabitants. Thousands perished or were sold into slavery. Proclamations were issued against the reading of the Torah, observance of the Sabbath, circumcision, and other rituals of the Jewish faith. An abomination of desolation, probably just a Greek altar, was installed in the temple. Jason, the instigator of the disaster, fled once again and died alone in exile. At that crucial moment, the long-awaited Messiah appeared in the form of Judas Maccabeus. The timing was opportune, as the Seleucids, overstretched and fighting enemies on all sides, were in decline. Jewish rebels reconquered their old territories and new ones to boot, pushing the boundaries of an independent kingdom beyond the borders of ancient Judea and Israel. The sacred scriptures, including the writings of the long-dead prophets Jeremiah and Daniel, were reinterpreted and re-edited to foretell such events. Those Hellenistic Jews who survived the rebel onslaught kept a low profile. The first two books of the Maccabees, which describe this period, are counted among the Septuagint and the Catholic and Orthodox Old Testaments. Written in the epic style of Homer and Euripides, they highlight the defeat of the Greeks on the battlefield while betraying the mark of their influence. The Hasmonean Dynasty, as it became known, did not work out. Maccabean kings proved to be no friends to orthodoxy. They assumed the title of high priest, mixing secular and priestly power. This challenge to Mosaic tradition did not endear them to the priestly class, nor to purists who reserved kingship for the family of David. The Maccabean kings might have gotten away with it if not for their corruption and greed, which offended the common people. Yet the dynasty endured more than a century until the arrival of the new kids on the block. Having conquered the remaining Seleucid province of Syria and dispatched Cleopatra, the last Ptolemaic regent in Egypt, the Romans were ready to take Palestine, as indeed they did. In 63 BC, after a successful siege, General Pompey entered the city and the temple. The Jews were once again under the yoke of a foreign power. They were allowed their own ruler, Herod Agrippa, but real power rested on the banks of the Tiber. Roman lordship offered peace, stability, and even prosperity for some. During this period, the Second Temple was renovated as a magnificent structure under the patronage of King Herod. The Romans generally adopted a tolerant approach to religion, permitting the conquered peoples to practice whatever faith they followed. In return, they expected similar respect towards their gods, observance of the law, payment of taxes, and service in the armed forces. For many throughout the empire, that was an acceptable trade-off. For die-hard Jews, this involved compromise with non-believers, not an option for the righteous. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. They would neither tolerate any other religion, for Yahweh was a jealous God, nor allow non-Jews, with their detestable practices, to partake in theirs. They were the chosen people. Why had God abandoned them to the heathen? The answer to this question would write the next chapter in the history of the Hebrews and the Roman Empire.